Welcome to the K-State Regen Ag Pod, where we talk all things regenerative agriculture here at Kansas State University, across the state of Kansas and beyond. I'm Nick Detter, your host, and today I'm joined by Dr. Romulo Lollato, Professor of Agronomy and Extension Wheat and Forage Production Specialist for the K-State Department of Agronomy. Alongside him is Dr. John Kirkegaard, a Chief Research Scientist of Farming Systems for CSIRO, Australia's national science agency, and currently a visiting Fulbright Distinguished Chair in Agriculture and Life Science supported by Kansas State University in Fulbright, Australia. They join me to discuss Romulo's recent sabbatical trip to Australia, Dr. Kirkegaard's research on topics such as tillage, cropping system diversity, and nutrient management, and how the lessons learned in Australia may have applications in Kansas agriculture. John, Romulo, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Nick. Good to be here.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, great to be here.
Well, I think to start, if you guys could just introduce yourselves to our audience, maybe Romulo, you could go first, and then John, you could follow him, and just tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into your current role, and what you're currently doing for the university.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am originally from Brazil, right? And I grew up in a family farm there. Quite the different system than what we have here in Kansas today, because we grew up in an environment where we had 75 inches of rainfall a year, right? So definitely water deficit was not a concern most of the time, although it did have short periods of water stress. So growing up in a family farm, primarily growing corn and soybeans and spring wheat, right? So I studied agronomy back in Brazil as well, and had the opportunity to come to Oklahoma State University to do a master's which was focused on wheat production. At that point in time, I was very happy working with, either wheat or corn or soybeans, and I had some experience with dry beans as well. And so that seemed like a great opportunity for me to jump in and move here to the United States. I was at Oklahoma State University there in Stillwater for about 5 years, doing my master's and then my PhD. My work there was, again, focused on wheat agronomy and improving issues related to soil fertility and managing the crop for yield potential and variety by fertility interactions, right? Acid soils was a big problem at the time. So that was kind of the focus of my master's degree and part of my dissertation. And when I was finishing up my PhD, this position here came up at K-State. This was back in the fall of 2015. When I moved up here, right? So I've been the extension wheat and forage specialist then here for the last 10 to 11 years now. And in my current role, actually, where I was doing my master's and my PhD was a very similar position. Actually, essentially the same position that I have today was my former advisor's position there at Oklahoma State. So it was really a really good fit. And here in my current role, I'm 80% extension. So a lot of what I do is out there with the growers, trying to bring knowledge to them and help their decision making on the farm, whether it is via variety selection or improved management for trying to make more profit out of the wheat crop. And applied research as well, right? So I have a 20% research appointment, have a group of students that kind of range there from 10 to 20 students, depending on the year and whatnot. But those students are really leading all of our research, which is, again, very applied, cultivar by management, by environment interaction, with that idea of answering to growers, how can they better manage their crop in their own environmental conditions so they can be more profitable and more sustainable in their farming operation. So again, very focused on wheat and do some work with alfalfa as well in my current role.
Could you tell us, before we transition to John, a little bit how you ended up in Australia and got connected with John? Maybe to set the stage for why John is with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. So John and I go back a few years here through an organization called the Wheat Initiative, right? And so the Wheat Initiative, I think John can give a bit more background on that as well. But essentially, John and Brian Barris, who is a colleague from Canada, they started a group within the Wheat Initiative. It's an expert working group in agronomy, really with the goal of coordinate global research going on in wheat agronomy within that group. And I was very interested in that, so I started as participating in that group as John and Brian were taking the lead there. So this goes back to probably 2018 timeframe, 2017, 2018 timeframe, when I first started with some contact with John at that point in time. And we've kept in touch there. Here more recently, for the last 3 years or so, John and Brian kind of stepped down from their leadership role. And myself and a colleague also from Australia, Kenton Parker, we stepped up as the leaders of that expert working group. So that's kind of how the connection with John goes back a few years, and how we started getting connected there. Now, it also translates to how I got to Australia, right? Because this colleague that I just mentioned, Kenton Parker, he identified a fellowship opportunity via the GRDC, which is the Grains Research and Development Corporation that essentially funds most of the agricultural research that goes on in Australia. And so Kenton sent out that opportunity to me a few months back here, and we saw that as a way to work together a little bit closely, with the goal, one of the goals being advancing this expert working group within the wheat initiative that again was started by John and Brian a few years back.
It's such an exciting partnership, and John, we're so glad to have you, and I'm excited to learn a little bit about you and your research. So if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself to our audience.
Sure, Nick. My name's John Kirkegaard, and I grew up in a small country town in Australia of about 900 people, rural community, not on a farm. My dad was the local pharmacist and my mum was a teacher, but all of my friends at school were from farms, and I kind of spent a fair bit of time hanging around with them. We moved from that small town to a larger coastal town, but to a school that had a school farm. And so I was able to actually enroll in agriculture as a subject at school, agriculture and animal husbandry. And my dad also bought a small hobby farm where I was able to keep a few cows and chickens. But I returned most summer holidays to this small town I came from, and working on the farm and sort of earning money as I went through uni. After I finished school, I enrolled in agricultural science at Queensland University in Brisbane, got my bachelor degree there, and then moved on to do a PhD in the area of soil compaction, the effect of soil compaction on sort of heavy black clay soils on grain legume production. So I guess I've always been interested in the effect of soil issues on crop production. That's probably my interest. And agronomy interests me because there are so many different aspects to it. There's crop science and soil science and economics and crop physiology, and so I'm a little bit restless, and I find it a little bit hard to concentrate on one thing for too long. So agronomy's really suited me. When I graduated with my PhD, my first job was with the CSIRO down in Canberra. So my hometown was up in Queensland in the sort of northern subtropical part of Australia, and my job with CSIRO is in Canberra, in the nation's capital. CSIRO is the national science agency, so it was a fantastic opportunity. It was only a 3-year job when I enrolled, but the job was on a project called the Land and Water Care Initiative. The Australian government had just committed over $2 million to fund CSIRO to look into more sustainable farming systems in southern Australia. So this was the era of no-till just starting to take off in Australia. So I guess my first job really was to set up a long-term trial on no-till farming systems, no-till stubble retention. And involved with that was also bringing in new rotation crops to make that system work. So canola was a crop that was just coming in at that time. So a lot of my work right since those early days has been looking at new agronomic ideas like no-till. All my work's really been on farm, so based on commercial farms, setting up long-term experiments with farmers. But I was really in the fortunate position sitting in CSIRO in Canberra of having a lot of specialists all around me, crop physiologists, soil scientists. And so when I saw an issue in the field, I had an opportunity to bring some things back into the lab and really get my teeth into it and try to understand what was going on so that we could sort of take steps forward. So my career really, as I said, initially working out how to get no-till working. It didn't work all that well in our kind of higher rainfall, wetter area initially. So done a lot of work to try and understand what was going on there. As canola came into the rotation, I was looking at the benefits of that and the benefits of other crops like grain legumes. And as Romulo mentioned, Australia, of course, water, rainfall, drives everything. So this is all dry land production. There's no irrigation. And so really a lot of my work has focused on how we can capture, store, and use water really efficiently to basically grow more crop per drop, as we say. And over the course of my career, I've had a couple of sabbaticals. I did one in the UK for 6 months in 1997, and then one in Denmark for 6 months in 2012. And I guess the Great Plains of the US was always a big gap in my sort of experience. And I know it's a big wheat growing area, and wheat's the biggest crop in Australia. So when I heard about this Fulbright opportunity, and particularly because of my links already with Romulo, I thought it was just a great opportunity and a period in my career where I could come and fill in that gap in my sort of understanding of global wheat production systems. So here I am.
Well, like I said, we're really glad to have you. I think before we dive into some of your specific research results, if just for our audience, you could kind of set the stage of the growing environment in Australia. I mean, I know it's a massive country, so I don't know if you want to narrow that down to maybe just your area of research, the region where you're doing research. But if you could just kind of talk about some of the main crops grown. I know you mentioned wheat and canola, but also in the growing environment,
Sure.
and some of the main challenges you guys face down under.
Yeah. So I guess the main thing, Australia is a big country. It's about the same size as the mainland US, but obviously quite a lot of Australia is desert. So the central part of the country is mostly desert. If there is any agriculture, it's very wide-ranging grazing of rangelands. But essentially, there's a belt of country wrapping right around down the east coast, right around the south, and across into Western Australia, which we call the wheat sheep belt. So it's a zone that receives about 10 inches to 25 inches a year of rainfall from the driest edge to the wettest edge. That's the area where most of these dry land crops are grown. We can't grow anything in the summer. We can only grow winter crops. It's just too hot and dry in this part of Australia to grow anything in the summer. So essentially, we have a summer fallow, and we grow a single winter crop. In our southern hemisphere winter, so from April to November. So we grow about in that area traditionally. It used to be called the wheat sheep belt, and that was because the farms there essentially were they ran sheep on pastures, on clover-based pastures, and then they'd have a cropping enterprise. So essentially, a field would be in pasture for 4 to 5 years to build up the fertility. It would then be cultivated, and wheat and barley were the main crops that would be grown. So, back in the 50s and 60s, that was a very profitable thing to do. Wool was very, high value crop for us to export, mostly to the UK. And that wheat sheep system was very sustainable because you have the clover-based legume pasture building fertility, a few years of crop. You've got two businesses there to sort of offset against droughts and other things that were going on. So it's a pretty stable system. In the sort of going through the 70s and 80s, basically the market for wool got pretty bad. The market for crops got better. So what we saw happen was a real intensification of cropping. We started losing the pasture area, losing the sheep flock. Sheep dropped in the 10 years around 1990. The sheep numbers dropped from 170 million head of sheep to 70 million. And in the same time, the crop area doubled. So that gives you an idea of just how that intensification happened. And that crop intensification was made possible on the back of no-till farming, where essentially farmers stopped going round their fields with ploughs. They sowed a crop with one pass into the standing stubble of the previous crop. Their farms got larger. And they started to bring in some rotation crop like lupins and canola and other crops. So we grow about 30 million acres of wheat, about 10 million of barley, and 5 to 10 of canola. and then an equal amount of other grain legumes, a range of things like chickpeas, lentils, and so forth. And they're all spring crops, so that's the other difference with Kansas. We grow spring wheats, but we grow them in our winter, so that's a bit weird and a bit hard to get your head around. But we don't have really cold winters, so essentially we can grow spring crops through that period. Challenges, well, aside from water, which I already mentioned, we have some pretty difficult soils. So Australia is a very old and ancient country. It's a long time since we had a volcano or a glacier or any of those wonderful things you guys have had to build these prairie soils. And our soils are old and weathered. They're red, they're acidic, they're sodic, they're sometimes not very deep. They're quite sandy in places. So the farmers are dealing with a lot of challenging soils. An environment that's equally variable as guys in Western Kansas and other places would be used to, and temperatures, of course, under the current climate, we're getting sort of warmer conditions, sort of hotter springs, and less reliable rainfall. So dealing with a lot of those challenges, Australian farmers are sort of not very highly subsidised by the government. So effectively, we export 80% of what we grow, and we get world prices. Whatever the world price is for wheat, that's what our farmers will get without subsidies. So it's a risky environment, climatically, soils-wise, and global markets and an export-oriented business. So it's a risky place to be farming.
Yeah. With some of that, thank you for laying out that context. I think it's super helpful as, we have growers here listening to it. They can kind of wrap their mind around what the environment in which all this research is taking place. But with that in mind, could you just highlight, I know you've had a long and distinguished career, so it's probably hard to kind of distill it down into a few things, but what are some of the biggest takeaways you've had in your research over your career, and particularly related to soil health, as that's kind of the focus of the podcast?
Yeah, well, soil health and looking after soil, I guess, has been a focus of mine since my very first job in that land and water care. I mean, the name says it all, the Land and Water Care Initiative. And so hence my interest and my early career looking at no-till farming. At the stage I started in 1990, farmers were giving it a go. They could see the sense of it, but their crops were just not responding very well. They had very slow, when they did their no-till wheat into standing stubble, they'd often have very slow early vigor of the crop. Often they had trouble getting through the residue with their machinery, getting hooked up, and all sorts of issues like that. But it was this really slow growth of the direct drill crop that was of interest to me. I couldn't really understand what was going on. We could take intact cores from the field, from a no-till and a cultivated soil, take it back to the lab, provide them with all the water and nutrients they wanted, and yet they still grew slowly. And so it seemed odd to me as to what was going on. Initially, I thought it was a soil strength thing, just hard soil. The roots encounter hard soil. And we know from the Japanese bonsai kind of idea that anything that can restrict a root system can just slow the shoot growth down. Even if you supply lots of water, you get that dwarfing effect. But interestingly, I could take that soil core and sterilize it, or irradiate it, basically sort of kill the biology, and it would grow just as well as the cultivated one. So I was sort of thinking, well, what that tells you is it's not the physics of the soil; it's something going on in the biology, and for some reason, in the no-till system, we're bringing along some sort of negative biology that is holding the plant back. And so, to cut a long story short, it's an interesting story. A postdoc, Michelle Watt, who worked with me, she went out and she very carefully looked at the root tips in the field. She used to put liquid nitrogen in the field, freeze chunks of soil, bring it back, and really carefully look at what the root tips look like when they were growing in this no-till soil. When you think about it, a cultivated soil is nice and soft. The roots can go wherever they like. You get these long, white, really fast-growing root tips. In a direct drill soil, on our direct drill soils, may not happen in the prairie, on our direct drill soils, if you don't cultivate, they often, after years of cultivation, if you didn't cultivate, they set pretty hard. And the only place the roots could grow are in sort of holes and cracks and channels. and they'd often be growing really slow, and the root tip growth would be slowed right down. And if you think about it, the roots are exuding a lot of sugars and things that the microorganisms like to live on. And if you slow a root tip down and it's not moving through the soil, those bugs can build up in population right on the root tip. And what was happening in our soils was we had inhibitory Pseudomonas bacteria, which were building up right behind the root tip of these slow-growing plants. And they were releasing inhibitory substances which were basically just stopping or limiting the shoot growth. And so either by cultivating to make the roots grow faster or by sterilising to kill the bacteria, we could overcome the problem. But obviously sterilising is not a practical solution. And for the growers, what we focused on was, all right, what we want are fast-growing root tips. So the way to get a fast-growing root tip was to sow earlier when the soil was warmer so that the root tips are growing faster. And the farmers also fitted these very narrow blades underneath their seeding points, which would sort of go through the soil below the depth of the seed and just cut a slice and break open the soil just below the seed. So they weren't cultivating the whole soil surface. So in a sense, it's still a one-pass minimum till system. But just by breaking that soil up below the seed, the root would grow quickly and away it would go. So they had already worked that out. The farmers were already doing that themselves. We added to it by finding some wheat varieties that had naturally more vigorous root growth and showed that those varieties did much better in no-till. So a kind of interesting story where the soil physics and the soil biology were interacting to sort of hold the crop back. Once we sort of sorted that out, then, the no-till systems, farmers had sort of sowing earlier into warmer soil, using these deep points, and selecting a more vigorous variety pretty much overcame the issue. So that's one example. And of course that whole system really only worked when we brought rotation crops in, so that we weren't sowing one wheat crop into the stubble of another wheat crop, because there are lots of stubble-borne diseases and soil-borne diseases which would just carry over from wheat crop to wheat crop. And we had been doing that for many years. So when farmers first saw a wheat crop growing after canola, they couldn't believe their eyes. We were getting 30 and 40% yield benefits from that canola in the system. So I spent a lot of my time showing that this benefit of canola, because it was a new crop to growers. They didn't much like to grow it. It had small seed. It got attacked by red-legged earth mites. It needed all this love and attention compared to a wheat crop. They didn't really like growing canola, but boy, when they saw that wheat crop the following year, it pretty much sold itself on that response. And so we saw 27% increases in the profit from that canola wheat system compared to a wheat system, and 70% of that extra profit was coming from the better wheat crop, not from the canola crop. So canola sort of sold itself for what it did to the wheat. So the tillage system, the rotation system, and more recently, I guess another little interesting thing with soil biology, after 30 years of running this no-till experiment, which I only just finished a few years ago, we were sort of about 20 years in, we were not seeing soil carbon increasing. And this was puzzling to us. If we're not cultivating the soil, if we're leaving the residue there and not burning it, why were we not seeing a much bigger increase in soil carbon? And a PhD student who came to work with me, he was in his 60s when he did his PhD, he really nailed it. And what he said to us is, you don't find carbon in soil, you find organic matter in soil. And organic matter is made up of dead bits and pieces of microbes and other things, and it has a nutrient content, right? It provides nutrition and fertility, and that's because it's made up of not just carbon, but carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur in pretty predictable amounts. So his hypothesis was we were being so careful with our nutrients and making sure the crop was getting all the nutrients and not putting on more than we needed, that essentially there was no extra nutrients for the microbes to build their populations and to continue that cycling of nutrients and turning over and dying and building fertility. So he essentially took over one of my plots for 6 years. He he split it in two and he added supplementary nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur, in the ratios that he knew were required by the microbes. And we did that for 6 years in a row. And essentially, we started building soil carbon very quickly where we added the nutrients with the residue. And on the side where we just continued to add the residue without the nutrients, our soil carbon continued to sort of go down. So it was a really important lesson for me on our very, very infertile soils, that if we're too effectively stingy with the nutrients, if we just try to make sure the crop gets every last kilo of N we put on, and there's none left for the microbes, they will essentially release enzymes and break down the existing organic matter to provide the nutrients they need. And so essentially you're just taking one step forward and two step backs with your soil organic matter all the time. I think on beautiful fertile soils that you find in other countries, this may not be as big an issue. You guys may have more problem with mineralization of N that you sort of can't keep up with, but it's important for our growers, to know that they're not mining their soils, because the soil organic matter is so important for maintaining structure, to capture the moisture, to store the moisture, and to hang on to it, that we really had to be careful make sure our nutrient balance, what's coming in the farm and what's leaving the farm, try to keep that in balance so that we're not mining, because if you're mining, it's coming from your soil and from your soil organic matter. Those have been a few very much soil biology related issues, I guess, that have driven some very big leaps forward in productivity and water use efficiency in our farming system. So,
yeah, well, thank you, John. Romulo, I kind of want to turn to you now. I think those examples that John gave are so great, and I think they're particularly useful as kind of models of what good cropping systems research should look like, and how we're modeling research that's valuable and practical to farmers. But it is within a very different environment, and John even kind of highlighted some of those differences between Australia and Kansas. So I'm curious, Romulo, what you felt like you learned while you were in Australia. If you could just tell us a little bit about that trip, why you wanted to go down there, and what lessons you hope to bring back with you to Kansas.
Yes, absolutely. So, one of the things that I took out of that trip was that Australians are dealing with, as John mentioned, a very challenging environment, right, to start with. But a lot of times, depending on which region we're talking about the country, very challenging soils as well, right? So to some extent, we can say, well, we have some challenging environments as well. Go to Western Kansas, Eastern Colorado, right? We're probably talking about a fairly dry environment there. Well, I'd argue probably even drier in Australia, right? So depending on where we're talking about, of course. But on top of that, in parts of the country out there, they would have very problematic sandy soils as well, that sometimes they have a layer that make it makes the soil water repellent, and so it's a sandy soil that when the water comes down, it's not absorbed, right? It doesn't infiltrate in the soil, so very challenging there. And then on top of that, maybe it gets to about a foot or so, or a foot and a half depth, then they might have a restrictive layer to root growth there, where they need to deal with that as well, right? So I'm just highlighting that because that's one of the major things that I took away from there, is that they have very challenging environment and soils. And with that, they need to be very creative, right? And I think that's one of the things that I took the most out of this trip, is how they are dealing with some of these agricultural issues that they have in a very creative way. They're trying to find the biological solution for the problem. And once they find it, now they are trying to work with, perhaps the machinery specialist to try and come up with now the machinery solution for what they know can work from a biology perspective, right? So that was one of the things that was very interesting. Now, when I went, right, when this conversation first started going, and one of the goals that I had as I was going there is, of course, learning how they have been doing, both on the research side, how they are dealing with all of those issues that they have, as well as on the extension side, right? How they are bringing their message to growers and so on, and also having that objective of the wheat initiative that I mentioned before. So those are kind of like three major objectives, right? Research, extension, and a little bit of that coordination of a global network of research that we have ongoing. And from the research side, a couple of things that we're interested in was how can we make more money out of wheat crop? How can we be more efficient managing our inputs, right? And perhaps take the most out of our wheat crop. That was one of them. And a second research objective that we had was managing nitrogen in face of drought, right? So in drought-prone environments. And so those are a couple of things that I focused while I was there from the research side, right? So I was working with a lot of data that we have collected here in Kansas for the last 10 years or so. And we're able to access some very similar databases there in Australia from a lot of the research that they have going for multiple years now. And we're looking at some of the similarities and some of the differences between both systems. And one point that John mentioned just a while ago, right? I think when he was introducing himself and the background of the work that he does, one unit that they have been using, and I think makes a lot of sense for us in Kansas as well, is dollars per hectare or per acre, right? Per unit of rainfall or per unit of water available, right? So in drought-prone environments, in the end, if we want sustainability of that system, it needs to make money for the farmer, right? And can you make more money per unit of rainfall if water availability is your major limiting factor, right? So that's something that I explored quite a bit when I was out there. And it's quite interesting that some of the results that we were getting from Kansas were aligning fairly well. I mean, probably different management practices were showing up as more profitable because of the different environments, right? For example, when we're looking at the Australian data, one difference that was quite clear, and these are grower data. Okay, it's not necessarily experimental plots. These are from commercial fields, hundreds of commercial fields that we got data from in Australia, and there was a clear difference in dollars made per hectare per unit of water if the wheat was following a previous legume crop as compared to a continuous cereal system. Right, so just the benefit of that crop rotation showing up in how much money the farmer is making per unit of rainfall. Right, if I would give you some numbers, if I remember right, we're seeing anywhere from a wheat crop that was grown after a legume, they were making about 2.2 Australian dollars per hectare per millimeter of rainfall, or sorry, of available water. Whereas continuous wheat, they were close to that one. So it's about half of the profit making, again, simply from changing profit made in the wheat crop, simply by changing that previous crop or having more diverse rotation out there, right? And we got to some fairly similar values in Kansas, for example, in our example, when growers were using foliar fungicides or not. A lot more profit was being made for growers who were actually using foliar fungicide versus those who weren't, because the set of fields that we were working with, that particular research project, they were actually from kind of fairly wet seasons, and so fungicide was playing a big role there. So, some of the things that I was focusing was more along those lines, but some of the things that I guess that I learned just from being there that might be even more of interest here is just how they are integrating the research with growers and crop consultants. I think that was probably the most interesting thing that I took out of there. Part of it is because of their funding structure, right? The funding primarily coming from the institution that I mentioned before, the GRDC, which essentially for every ton of grain sold in the country, some fees are collected, and those fees go partially back to fund agricultural research. So essentially, growers are funding the research, right? And it's a pretty decent budget that they have at a nationwide to study all grains. I believe, John, correct me here, but I believe 250 million Australian dollars per year or so are coming from the GRDC to fund different research projects going on across the country. And because these are grower funded, they need to be relevant to the grower, right? I mean, you can do some blue sky research and so on, but in the end, it needs to change the bottom line at the farm. And one of the things that I think was very amazing the way that they were doing was just they were integrating growers in the development of those projects, right? So, researchers found problems, and a lot of times they found those problems in collaboration with growers. And really, to kick off the project, put a lot of growers and crop consultants who are exposed to that problem in a room and brainstorm for a couple of days, what are potential solutions here? Okay, the solution it could work, but we don't have the machinery to make it work. So how do we get there? So in the end, there's a very big input from growers into those research projects, right? And I think that makes a big difference for a few different reasons. So first, they make sure that the research project is always have that feedback from grower, and so it's going to be relevant to the grower, right? And with that as well, I think that improves the adoption of those results, because now growers have buy-in into that, right? They were there from the beginning. They're getting feedbacks on a yearly basis on how things are going, and do they need to change something on those trials, right? So that was probably the thing that I really enjoyed learning, among many other things, while I was there, and that I intend to bring it back to my program, is really this integration with, even a stronger integration with grower, because here, I think, just to give some background, right, we tend to do very applied research and bring this information to grower, and many times growers have questions, and that might ignite some more research, right? But at least I have not been part of projects here where we, again, put 20, 30, 40 growers and crop consultants in the room and brainstorm what they think are good solutions for the problem, and then we go back and test those, right? So that's definitely something that I'm bringing back, and I think it was probably, from all that I mentioned before, from research and extension and the global leadership part that were objectives, is the one that integrates the most, and probably the one that I'm more excited with bringing it back home.
Well, I think all the growers that are listening, I think we're excited to hear about anything that's shifting research in the direction of a more grower focused research. So I'm excited to see, how that trip impacted you and how it impacts your research and the research we're doing at K-State more broadly here going forward. Well, John, I'll turn it back over to you. Clearly, like you said, that I guess you had a little bit of a gap in places you had traveled and you hadn't been to the U.S. Great Plains, but there's something of interest to you now that you've came to Kansas, and so I'm just curious, what specifically you were interested in when you were traveling to the U.S. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that Fulbright program so people could familiarize themselves with that. And what have you learned already since you've been here, and what do you hope to learn in the rest of your time here?
Yeah, so just the Fulbright program, firstly, that was it's a remarkable program, started by Senator Fulbright after the Second World War. He saw the devastation in Europe, and he basically knew that if countries collaborate and have exchanges with each other and get to know each other better, they tend not to go to war with each other. So he convinced your Congress to use the money from selling off World War II military equipment to produce this program, which would support the exchange of people in both directions, from the US to other countries and from other countries to the US, in all forms of endeavor: science, art, music. It's an 80-year-old program this year, and 400,000 people have been supported to go in both directions. So I'm one of the lucky recipients of that vision he had. So of course I'm a pretty old guy, so I've come late to the party. But Fulbright scholarships are there for everybody from sort of my level right back down to sort of PhDs and junior scientists. So I'd encourage anyone listening who may be a researcher to look into it, because once you become a Fulbrighter, it's a network of people that you have. It's a strong alumni, and I've been contacted by people even since I came to Manhattan who were Fulbrighters and have invited me to their place for dinner and all sorts of things. So great program, the Fulbright program. Look, really, I suppose. A few things. I was listening to a talk from another guy who'd just gotten back from the US. He'd spent a Fulbright program here looking at non-chemical weed control strategies. What are people in the US doing about? And so while he was talking, I sort of, Fulbright, I've heard of that, but I don't know much about it. And I sort of was Googling it, and essentially it went from there. Like, I saw it, I read it, it looked pretty good. I felt like I was at a bit of a point in my career back in Australia where I was looking for something exciting and to get some new ideas. And as I said, the Great Plains of the US. I'd had other colleagues come here. I've done a lot of work on grazing wheat and also developed the idea of grazing canola. And a lot of that happens in this part of the world with your crops in Oklahoma and Kansas. That happens a lot. So there were a lot of things intriguing me about the system here, and I just wanted to sort of immerse myself in a different system. One of my interests is the way that no single innovation, when you change a system, there's no single thing that you do that's going to make a big difference. Now, that's a bit of a passion of mine, arising from a project we did a few years ago on water use efficiency, and we showed very clearly that lots of single things you might adopt, like no-till, like a new variety, like a precision planter, like none of those things take you very far by themselves. It's when you put the system together that you really move forward. So I guess what I'm wanting to learn is the Kansas farming system, the wheat farming system, and to get an appreciation for all the elements of it and the aspects of it, and think about where there might be some intervention points where we see crops not yielding to the potential, what's behind that, and can we manipulate that? And I guess in recent times, I'm excited by a couple of things. The first is our ability now to understand what the actual potential, what is the yield potential of a crop in this place? What is the environmental yield potential? And once you know what that is, you can see how close you are to it. It's so-called yield gaps. Like if you're not achieving that, like why aren't you achieving that? Could be good economic reasons, could be things you can't change, but really digging into that and asking, well, what's going on there? We almost doubled yields in Australia in the period that a particular project ran, where we got the right combination of agronomy together. So that's at an individual crop level. You can look to make changes, but then at a systems level, like I was talking before about the canola benefit to the wheat, and the great field day you ran yesterday, looking at cover crops in other crops, maize and soybean. That was a remarkable story as well, where the progress on that system that those growers have been making, and the changes they've had to make. The most astonishing thing to me was they now sow their soybeans before their corn, and yet it used to be the other way around, right? So they've made. Now, who would have thought they'd be doing that? Like, I bet they didn't think that would be happening 20 years ago. But the system's evolved, and a whole package of things have come together that's really making that work for them. So I'm hoping to promote that thinking, to promote that systems thinking, because I think that's where we can really make some gains. Even in breeding, I think we can think about breeding for the system rather than the crop. We tend in breeding to try and make our crops bulletproof to everything. We'll make it heat resistant, we'll make it drought resistant, we'll make it insect resistant, we'll whack a gene in. Sometimes there's opportunities to think about the farming system and say, well, hang on, let's position things a little bit differently in the season. Let's position things differently in order, and perhaps we can have that crop avoid some of those stressful circumstances and just switch up our system somewhere else. But anyway, I'm learning. I've just gotten here. Romulo's getting me around the state. I'm listening to a lot of scientists and growers and seeing a lot of wheat crops. I enjoyed the wheat tour, the Kansas wheat tour recently, and that was a really great experience because it sort of went right across the state, and we had millers and bakers and farmers and scientists, and that's an idea I'll be taking back to Australia. I think I think that's just a great. That's a great, having the whole industry together. I think right through that chain is something that perhaps we don't do so well in Australia. So, but anyway. I'm hoping that's one thing, but I'm also hoping to really propel the next generation of young scientists, forward and build opportunities for young scientists here in Romulo's team to come to Australia and maybe spend some time in my team or CSIRO's team across the country. And because there's no doubt that throughout my career, those international interactions, those opportunities to get off your own dung heap and have a look at what's going on elsewhere and bring ideas back and build networks is really fruitful.
Yeah, I completely agree. There's just something about getting outside of the environment that you're always in that seems to just generate new creativity that, when you're just kind of around the same people doing the same things, like I think there's a value in that consistency, but there also can be kind of a limitation of you just get stuck in your ways a little bit. So just hearing about your guys' partnership and relationship is just exciting for me and even spurring some thoughts in my own head. So I'm really grateful to have gotten to talk to both you guys today. Well, the last question I always ask to my guests, and I just kind of like to open it up broadly and let them kind of take the floor for their final thoughts and wherever they want to take the conversation is I just like to ask, like, what has you most excited in either your personal work or in your broader field of research? And I just think it's important for our audience to hear what's exciting experts like you guys and what keeps you motivated and going day to day. So we'll let Romulo go first, and then John will let you have the final word.
Yeah, sure thing. So I guess I'll provide a couple of perspectives here, Nick. One of them that gets me excited is one thing that John just mentioned is this continued collaboration that we're going to have with these relationships with Australia, right? And I can immediately already give a couple of examples. So in August now, I'm going back to Australia. I'll be a keynote speaker in their agronomy conference there. So that's going to already show some continuation from the sabbatical that I started when I was there. And on the same token, in November, in our agronomy conference, I'm bringing the colleague that I just mentioned before, Kenton Parker, to be a speaker in our symposium here as well. And so, that collaboration is already kind of like creating a longer lasting effects. And I have had already some of my students ask me, hey, can I go spend some time with John before I graduate, right? So, for sure, a lot of opportunities there to come and to not only, exchange knowledge, but also help train the next generation of scientists and agronomists to go out there and have this experience. So that definitely is something that is exciting. Now, from where I'm gearing my program next, probably what I'm most excited with is seeing what they have done in terms of finding solutions for agronomic problems that in some cases has led to doubling yield levels, right? What I'm most excited with, and I'm wanting to take a peek on John's brain while he's here, let's find that opportunity here in Kansas. I'm very excited to find the opportunity. What is our next level up in yields and profit for wheat production across the state, right? Because again, making more money is going to make producers more sustainable, right? Their fields more sustainable. So that's kind of what I'm most excited with. I saw how they were able to get one agronomic problem that sometimes one can just say, well, that's our potential, right? That's how much we can grow. And they were saying, no, I mean, it's challenging, but let's go after it and let's find a biological solution. And then from there, let's work with the machinery people and find a mechanical solution for that. And now they're bringing yields from 20 bushels to 45 bushels per acre in those very challenging, drought-prone, sandy soils. So that's probably not the problem that we're going to have to work with here. But my next goal is let's find what is limiting our yields and let's try to see how can we overcome that and potentially, I don't know if doubling, but I mean, push it as far as we can and make more money on the way. That's probably what the things that I'm most excited with at the moment.
And John, how about you?
Yeah, well, I'd reiterate all of those things Romulo said about the future of our interaction and the potential to have some exchange and an ongoing interaction. That's going to be really great. It's hard for me to go past the fact that I just became a new grandfather, Nick. That's exciting me at the moment, and
Yeah.
and I'll be returning to Australia for what was originally an unscheduled trip back in the middle of my sabbatical to meet my grandson Charlie. So that's exciting me. But scientifically, I guess I'm watching and have been watching for some time all of the evolution of digital technologies, and I've been trying to hire a digital agronomist into my team because I see a lot of promise there. I think the wave of digital technologies, as I've watched it, has stayed a bit ahead of where the farmers are at, at the farm level. But I think they're gonna meet sometime soon. They're gonna meet, and there's going to be a lot more practical application of some of these digital technologies And I just see those as a new tool coming in. Imagine if you can place a seed and microdose of fertilizer exactly where you want it in a field, and you can control a weed with a non-chemical solution, very, very precisely. Just imagine, and these things can be going up and down autonomously, all day, every day. You sort of imagine that, you imagine what's possible in terms of food production and efficiency and dealing with field variability, with zone management and that sort of thing. I kind of see that. I look at that, and I guess I have to fast forward, but I can see so many ways where this idea of synergies, of how that new technology would synergize with a lot of the agronomy we're wanting to do now, but we can't do because we just can't do things carefully enough or accurately enough. So that's going to be an exciting, it'll be an evolution. Most things in agriculture are evolutions, not revolutions, but there's going to be exciting opportunities open up there. And I think that the young generation of farmers who've come through and learn a lot of those techniques, flying drones and looking at all this kind of stuff that's sort of second nature to them, they're going to take this forward. And I think if we can keep some good agronomic thinking and some good crop physiological and soil science understanding to underpin that, there's going to be some really big breakthroughs, I think.
Well, congratulations on your grandchild. I think that's always good news to highlight. And John and Romulo, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. And everybody, thank you for tuning into the K-State Regen Ag Podcast, and we will talk to you next time.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Nick. Great to be here.
Oh, give me a home where the buffalo roam, where the deer and the antelope play, where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all day. Home, home on the range, where the deer and the antelope play, where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all day.